Here we go. Great. So thank you all so much for joining us. We have a very full agenda and some amazing presenters today. So I'm going to try to get through my part as quickly as possible. My name is Sarah Potter. I am the Education Program Manager with John Burton Advocates for Youth, or JBAY, and I work on the statewide Foster Youth FAFSA and CADAA Challenge. Joining me today, who you might hear from as well, is my colleague Jessica Petras, and many of you may know her, so feel free to say hello to her as well. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off. I'm going to do a quick overview of the FAFSA challenge. I wanted to mention that there are a few brand new FYSCPs who are joining us today, and this is their very first year with the FAFSA CADAA challenge for foster youth. And so I'm going to provide that overview for their benefit as well. And then we have a presentation today on SB 860 from CDE. Very happy that Janet is joining us today for that. And then we'll talk a bit about WebGrants and how to use WebGrants, specifically the new secure file transfer system to verify FAFSA and CADAA completion. We'll then have a special presentation from the LA County Office of Education, who did an amazing analysis on equity data of their foster youth and those who completed the FAFSA. And then we're going to close out today with a panel presentation from the counties who won the FAFSA challenge last year. So you'll get to hear from counties of various sizes about what worked well for them and what strategies they've refined. My colleague Jessica will be sharing in the chat and typing in the chat. So if you have questions or anything sort of bubbles up for you, feel free to type them in the chat. I'm hoping we'll have a little bit of time for Q&A at the end. If not, we'll get to those questions in the chat as we're going. She'll also be sharing some links in the chat as well. The first link that I'm going to ask her to drop in is the link to the Google Drive that has all of the materials for today's meeting. So don't feel like you have to take a copious amount of notes. All the slides are in the Google Drive, as well as materials that our presenters are going to be sharing and talking about today. So with that being said, I would love it if everyone just took a moment to write in the chat and share their name, their county, their role with the FAFSA/CADAA challenge, and then share your goal for the 2021-2022 challenge. So what completion rate are you hoping to hit? I would love to hear some of those aspirations, and I might even call on some of you. So feel free to drop that in the chat, and that'll help us also do roll call for today. So please make sure we know that you are here. And then as everyone's doing that, I'm just going to do a quick refresher on why we focus so much on college for youth who are in foster care. And so when we look back at the last Great Recession that occurred back in 2007, 2008, when the housing market crashed, we saw that nearly 5.5 million jobs were lost that previously went to people who had a high school diploma or less. And as the economy began to recover and there were more jobs being added to the job market, those jobs were really for people who had at least some college, but really even more so those who had a bachelor's degree or higher. And so those 5.5 million jobs that were lost, that went to folks who had a high school diploma, were gone. They did not recover. They did not come back. The jobs that were added to the market required a college degree. And so we know that having a post-secondary education not only helps you weather economic storms and helps shield against unemployment, but we also know that it contributes to higher quality of life. We know that people who have a college degree tend to have more career satisfaction and work satisfaction, and they also have better health outcomes. And those health outcomes don't only impact them as individuals, but it impacts their family as well. So we know that, again, post-secondary education, and I'm preaching to the choir, is really important for our youth in foster care. And when we talk to youth who are in foster care about their college aspirations, we know that 86% indicated that they want to go to college, that they have dreams of going to college and achieving a post-secondary degree. But we know that there's a big gap between that aspiration and the realities. Only 55% ultimately enroll in a post-secondary program, and only 11% end up completing a 2 or 4 year degree by age 23. So there's a major disconnect between those who want to go to college and those who ultimately are successfully able to complete a degree. And when we sort of elaborated on this and asked foster youth who graduated high school and were thinking about matriculating to college, nearly half of them indicated that they did not receive enough support with college applications and college readiness. And so that is, again, one of the, I think, many reasons why we have been supporting the FAFSA challenge. The other important thing to know, and why we focus so much on financial aid, is that it is the single greatest indicator as to whether or not a student persists in a higher education program. And so students who received about $1,000 to $2,000 in financial aid, only 17% ended up transferring to a 4-year program or completing their 2-year program. But when we looked at students, who received $7,500 in financial aid, that number increased to 49%. So we know that the more financial aid a student is able to get, the higher likelihood that they're going to successfully complete their program or transfer to a 4-year program. So again, this is why we really hone in on financial aid and why the FAFSA challenge was born. So with that being said, I'm going to quickly go through what the FAFSA challenge is and have some important updates for this year. And so for those of you who are new to the FAFSA challenge, and like I mentioned before, we have some brand new FYSCPs on our call today. The FAFSA challenge launched in 2017. This is the 5th year of the FAFSA challenge. And the FYSCPs, our Foster Youth Services Coordinating Programs, serve as the central coordinators of the challenge. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're the ones who are working one-on-one or individually with students to complete FAFSA and CADAA applications. It means that they're really the ones who are coordinating the community partners and the other adult supporters who are working with foster youth on completing those applications. They're also the ones who use WebGrants to verify FAFSA completion. And they can now do that one of 2 different ways, which we'll talk about later on. But this being able to track and definitively verify if a student has completed the FAFSA has really helped solidify the FAFSA challenge, because instead of relying on verbal reports that it was done, we can know for a matter of fact if it was completed. And furthermore, we know if that student received an expected family contribution and their student aid report was transmitted to the school and their financial aid is being prepared. And this is a major component of the challenge, because if their application was submitted, but it was submitted incorrectly or there's missing information, then the schools that they want to attend simply just don't know that that application was done and it doesn't get transmitted. And then last but not least, like I mentioned, our FYSCPs really serve as the central coordinator of the effort. And so they help bring partners together, whether it's CASAs, LEAs, social workers, et cetera, and they provide training and technical assistance on completing the FAFSA with youth in foster care. And I know that I'm talking to many of you, so thank you. Thank you for all of your efforts, and thank you for all that you do. And so many of you know too that the FAFSA challenge has worked. And so back in 2017, when the first year of the challenge, we saw a 45% foster youth completion rate, and that steadily increased until 2019, 2020, where we saw foster youth reach a 64% statewide completion rate. And that was a really monumental year, because it was the first time in the history of the FAFSA challenge, and in the history as far as we know, that foster youth high school seniors actually completed the FAFSA and the CADAA at a rate higher higher than non-foster youth high school seniors. So they really exceeded the general population with that completion rate. Unfortunately, due to COVID and all of the challenges that posed last year, we saw the completion rate dip to 55%. And our hope this year is to get back some of the gains that we had made in the earlier years of the challenge, and really kind of build off of the success we saw in 2019, 2020. And with that being said, our hope this year is that we reach a 70% completion rate. And we hope that you all will join us on that journey. There's been a couple changes to the FAFSA CADAA challenge policies and procedures. These will be updated on the website later today. We're actually going through and creating some new screenshots for this year. But other than that, they're pretty comparable to previous years. The baseline stays the same and includes all 12th graders who were in foster care, regardless of their credit count. That also includes students who are on a non-diploma track. It also includes foster youth who might be in family maintenance or family reunification. Those should be calculated in the baseline. We are requiring verification through WebGrants. We'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. And there's additional guidance on our website as well as in the policies and procedures that we'll talk about. And then the deadlines, of course, this year have shifted. The first reporting period will cover October 1st through March 2nd. That's very comparable to how we've done this in previous years. We do that first reporting period after the priority deadline for the FAFSA. And so that report will be due to us on March 23rd. And then we decided to heed a lot of the advice of our partners from last year who were asking us to push out the date, the end date for the FAFSA challenge. We had an earlier date in May, but many of you said, we want to go to the very end. So we pushed out the final report to cover October 1st through June 17th. And that report will be due to us on July 8th. And just as a reminder, both of the reports are cumulative. So we want to know the total number of high school seniors in foster care who completed the FAFSA from October 1st through June 17th. So just make sure that it's that cumulative number. And shortly after we get the results in early July and early April, we will announce winners and we will issue awards. We're also this year going to be doing another Most Improved County Award. So if you have had a lower completion rate, or maybe got hit really hard last year due to COVID, this could be your year to win. We added that incentive. So reach out and we'd be happy to help you strategize. All right, so I'm going to now turn it over to our partners at CDE. Janet's going to talk a bit about SB 60. We're really excited about this because this is the first year of the challenge where SB 860 is in full effect. So we invited Janet here today to talk about the guidance around SB 860 implementation. So Janet, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. So hello, everyone. My name is Janet Abdul-Sayed, and I work with the Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program over at the California Department of Education. And today I'll be discussing SB 860 and how our FYSCPs have implemented this legislation thus far. Next slide, please. Today's agenda will include a quick overview of SB 860 and the responsibilities of the FYSCP in its implementation. I'll also briefly discuss the new funding for foster youth direct services and cover the data reporting requirements. And finally, I'll wrap up with some helpful resources. Next slide, please. So let's start with an overview of the legislation. SB 860 became effective January 1st of this year, and it amends California Education Code section 42921 and 42923. And this requires the FYSCP plan to also describe how the program will coordinate efforts to the extent possible for the completion of the FAFSA or California DREAM Act application for foster youth pupils who are in grade 12. And just to take a step back a little, the Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program requires our county offices of education to submit a program plan based on the needs identified within their county. So the plan must address specific information included in legislation, and an additional section was created in the plan to address SB 860. In addition to the plan requirement, SB 860 requires the superintendent report to the legislature on the FYSCP, which is submitted July 1st of each even numbered year, to also include the number and percentage of pupils in foster care who successfully complete a FAFSA or California DREAM Act application while in grade 12. Next slide, please. So let's cover how the FYSCP is implementing SB 860. This is the actual prompt that our FYSCPs had to respond to in the plan. And we just started the new 21-24 period, grant period for the FYSCP, July 1st of this year. And this prompt aligns with what the legislation requests. Next slide, please. So what does it mean to coordinate efforts around FAFSA or California DREAM Act application completion? I know Sarah talked about this earlier. It could be many things. It could include providing trainings to LEAs around how to complete the FAFSA or California DREAM Act application, or how to collect the data needed to fulfill the requirements of the legislation. It could also mean checking with counselors to see the status of completion, or providing technical assistance on particular situations that might be complex in nature. It could also include collecting data from LEAs to report on the Foster Youth Services Coordinating Program end of year report numbers. These are just some of the examples of coordinating efforts. Next slide, please. I do also want to briefly mention the new allocation of foster youth direct service funding for COEs, because these funds may also be used to support the goal of SB 860. I don't want to go too much in detail with the foster youth direct services funding, but I will share some helpful information as it relates to this legislation. So Section 141 of AB 167 allocates $30 million to COEs to provide direct services to foster youth, and $5 million of that $30 million appropriation must be used to provide direct services to improve post-secondary education and enrollment outcomes. So that could certainly include direct services around FAFSA or California DREAM Act application completion. And so it's important to note that a direct service waiver is not required when using these funds to provide direct services. As many of you know, if FYSCP funds are used to provide tutoring, mentoring, or counseling, a direct service waiver is required annually. And this waiver requires that the school district certify that they're unable to provide those services. So COEs have until June 30th, 2024 to expend these funds. And initially, AB 130 provided our COEs 2 years to expend the funding, but with AB 167, they now have 3 years. So that'll help them with planning. And there is flexibility with these funds to provide direct services to assist with FAFSA or California DREAM Act application completion. So counseling and working one-on-one with students to complete those applications would be one example of that. And again, a direct service waiver would not be required. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into the data reporting requirements. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, SB 860 does require the CDE to include the number and percentage of foster youth in grade 12 who complete the FAFSA or California DREAM Act applications on the biannual report to the legislature. CDE will be collecting this data from our FYSCPs through the end of year report. And our FYSCPs will be asked whether they included the FAFSA or California DREAM Act application completion in their program plans, as well as what the completion numbers were within their county. Next slide, please. So legislation does not prescribe how our COEs must collect this data from LEAs, so the completion may be confirmed through WebGrants, district school site staff, other community partners working with the student, or confirmation from staff completing the application with the student. Next slide, please. Okay, so let's wrap up with a few resources. Next slide, please. Last year, we presented to our FYSCPs on SB 860. You can view a copy of that slide deck along with a guidance handout that I believe is hyperlinked on the agenda for today. And that includes FAQs on the FYSCP Hub. And if you have any questions at all, please feel free to contact our team, and the email is there on the slide. Next slide, please. And we also encourage you to work with your foster youth district and county contacts if you have any questions. They're really the experts on the ground and can provide you with information around this legislation, as well as how it is being implemented within your county. And that concludes my presentation. I can stick around and monitor the chat to see if there are any questions. And thank you for having me.
Thank you, Janet. And we have a few moments if there's any questions and folks want to come off of mute or raise their hands to ask a question, that would be great. Or feel free to input those in the chat. Again, thank you so much, Janet. Hopefully I saw the flurry of messages in the chat about the Google Drive, and it looks like it's working now. So the SB 860 guidance is also included in that Google Drive if anybody would like to retrieve that as well. All right, so I don't see any hands raised and I don't see any questions for Janet, so I'm going to keep us moving. The next topic we're going to cover today is WebGrants and how to verify FAFSA and CADAA completion using WebGrants, the new secure file transfer system in WebGrants. And so joining us today, we have some of our partners from the California Student Aid Commission. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to them to explain what the secure file transfer system is, how to get it, how to use it, all of that fun stuff. So sorry, I have a long list of folks on here, but I saw Adrian is on, I believe Pooja's on.
Hi, Sarah, this is Pooja, yes.
Hi.
So yes, I can give some information about the new foster youth automation process. Hello, everyone. My name is Pooja. I work as an information technology specialist for California Student Aid Commission. So recently we have launched the foster youth FAFSA challenge automation process where we have created a secure file transfer system for all the county users. So just to give a background, this process was a manual process earlier where counties used to send the students through files to CSAC, and then CSAC used to manually validate all the students against our database and then send it back to the county users. So with this new process, what we have implemented is we have created folder for each county users, which is a very secure folder, and each county would be able to access only their folder with a secure username and password. And they can simply drag and we have implemented this using Windows secure copy protocol. So they can simply log into their folder and drag the file into their folder, and the process will automatically kick off the validation process. It will validate the students based on their SSID, first name, last name, against our database, and then it will generate a report in the report folder, and an email notification will get sent to the user saying that this process has been completed and the report is available. And the user can log into the report folder and simply access the report. This is our first version that we have implemented for this process, and we are still getting feedbacks from counties who are actively using this process. And we are trying to figure out and fix all the errors that they are facing, or they are trying some modifications. So this is actually all about the process. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, I wanted to jump in and add to that. Some of our FYSCPs might be using the traditional sort of WebGrants interface and have probably used our WebGrants guide in the past to figure out which reports to download and what to look at. This process does not require a WebGrants user account to utilize. It is external to WebGrants, but connected. And so if you are one of the counties who is part of a COE that has maxed out the number of WebGrant user accounts that you're permitted to have, this would be a really good option for you because you don't have to have a user account. You don't have to go through that application process to get a user account, and it can be set up relatively simply. It's also streamlined in the sense that you just simply input your list of students into an Excel spreadsheet. You have their SSID, their date of birth, their first name, last name, and then it does the data match for you. So it'll let you know if they've completed the FAFSA, if they've received an expected family contribution. There's also information on there regarding the Chafee grant. And so it's much more streamlined and I think simplified than it was for those of you who are familiar with doing this the old school way in WebGrants. I know Pooja mentioned that it's a very new system. We've encountered some bugs, and this year, one of the ways that we're kind of tackling the bugs is by working closely with Adrian and some of our larger counties to utilize this system and the traditional system to identify if there's any discrepancies, and then work with CSAC and Pooja and her team to correct those issues. But it is a much more streamlined version. I have the instructions that CSAC developed on how to utilize this new system. They're in the Google folder, which should now be working. Sorry about that. I also have the Excel spreadsheet template in that Google folder as well. And that template is what you would input and then drop into the secure file and then download once that data match is complete. So I also wanted to just throw up a couple questions for Pooja and her team, just to make sure that everybody has clarity about how to gain access to the system. So Pooja, how would an FYSCP go about getting access to the system or getting access to the secure file folder?
So if you need an access to the system, you have to contact CSAC help desk, or which will be my team, and then we will have to configure the users who needs access to the system, and we will create a secure username and secret access key for their account, and they should be able to use it through WinSEP.
Gotcha. And how long does that usually take once they reach out?
Usually it will take like a couple of days. It's not like very long process, but yeah, we just have to configure them in our system, and then we usually get back to them.
Great. Awesome. And then if there's any issues with the system or they're having difficulty utilizing it or notice discrepancies, who should they contact?
They can contact CSAC help desk, and they will route the ticket to our team.
Awesome. So we have a little bit more time too. So those are the questions that I thought would be helpful. But if there are other questions, I want to go ahead and open it up for folks to ask while CSAC is here.
And in the future, actually, we can also work on maybe creating a link for the access to the users, so that they can directly just open a ticket with our help desk team, and then it will get routed to us.
Awesome. And then I think Vanessa has a question. So Vanessa, do you want to take yourself off mute?
Yes, I do have a question. So just regarding this automated process, I know it's automated, but is it, how would I say this? Is it automatic every month, or do we have to go in and send this Excel spreadsheet anytime we want updated information? if that makes sense.
Yes, it's not automatic. So whenever you will drop the file in the system, it will kick off. So it's not like a particular day or particular time that it will run. You can do it anytime.
Okay. And so is it updated monthly, kind of like the way WebGrants reports are? Because when we go, I'm still using the traditional WebGrants way. And so I have noticed that they are uploaded at least once a month. It seems like it anyways. So does it just follow that information, whatever's on the traditional WebGrants?
Yes.
Okay. That's it. Thank you.
Those are great questions. Thank you, Vanessa. Any other questions? I see Lauren, I think you have your hand raised. Do you want to take yourself off of mute?
Yes, thank you. This is my first year, so I apologize if this question has already been answered or is repetitive. If there's multiple foster youth services educational liaisons using the web grant as well as this, I know you said they could use both and use it as a comparison, but is that what most counties do? Like they use both and they have multiple people, or is there usually a point person?
That's a good question, Lauren. I'll go ahead and start with that one. So I think that there's some counties that have a lot of familiarity with using the previous WebGrant system and who are just now starting to use this newer file transfer system. And those are the counties that are doing both because they're helping us see if there's any sort of discrepancies or issues with the logic in the secure file transfer. But I don't think that you need to do both. And I think that CSAC would probably say the same thing. I don't know if you want to chime in on that, Pooja.
Yes, that's right. I don't think you need to do the both.
And just to add, there are a limited number of users that can have access to the WebGrants account. I think you had asked to Lauren, and maybe Pooja can clarify that too, how many users for WebGrants and then the WinZip file.
Yeah, so far, I think the maximum users we have configured for one county is like 3. So we can definitely configure multiple users, but they will be sharing the same folder. But yes, multiple users can access the folder.
Right. And I see, Helena, you have a question as well.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe you answered this, but if you have a password from the old school way, can you use that to get into this new way, or do you need to request a new username? And
this is no, you cannot use the old school password for this. So this is not a system where you have to register. So if you want to use this new system, we will just send you like a unique username and a secret access key in a file, which is a one-time setup that you have to configure in the WinSCP. And that's it. You will be able to access it, but it's not the same as your username and password for WebGrants.
okay, thank you. I just want to say it seems like it's going to make it so much easier to track the students. So I can't wait to try it out.
Awesome.
That is the hope. And I'll tell you, we worked very, very closely with CSAC and Pooja and Adrian and everyone over on that team. And they really, really tried to make this easy because the prior way of doing this was labor intensive. And so we were very grateful that they worked so closely with us and listened to all of your concerns and needs. Any other questions? I see Mindy, you typed one in the chat. It says, if we had the electronic files prior years, do we need to set up a new one for this year? Mindy, I think that you're referring to the files, the reports that you get from Adrian. Is that correct? Okay. So yes, if you received reports from Adrian, what we're asking you to do is to use the secure file transfer system. Our hope is that for the larger counties like San Diego, that we do both for a little while until we figure out or make sure that there's no discrepancies. But ideally, our hope is to phase out Adrian and his manual work that he's been doing to do the FAFSA verification, and then ultimately get to a place where the secure file transfer folder does everything that Adrian was doing in the past. Fun fact for those of you who don't know, and Adrian's going to totally hate me for saying this, we call this Adrian bot. That was the code name for the secure file transfer system. It was Adrian bot. It's named after him. It's supposed to be able to do everything that he does to verify FAFSA completion, but without, of course, adding it to his long list of things that he needs to do. So yes, Mindy, will help you get set up as well, so you can have access to the system. And for those of you who are like a little bit nervous about it, I will just say too, I am not part of, I don't get to access WebGrants. I'm not with a COE or an LEA like many of you are. And so when I had the demo on how the system works from CSAC, it was the shortest meeting I think I had ever been on. It probably took them 5 minutes to demo how to use it. And the instructions that they work to create for you all are very clear and straightforward as well. So I am hoping that, like Helena mentioned, this just makes life so much easier and makes verification so much easier. And we're really excited to get this rolled out and to see you all using it. So any other questions for Pooja, CSAC, and co? Anything else? If anything comes to mind, feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can send us a message later. We really appreciate you being here and sharing an update on the new system. So, oh, yep, go ahead. I think I heard Pooja. Okay.
No, I just wanted to say thank you, Sarah. Thank you for providing the opportunity today.
Of course, we could not do it without you. We appreciate you. All right, so our next presentation I am incredibly excited about. So I'm going to turn this over to Leiko. We have a very special presentation that is going to cover the amazing, exciting things that Leiko did with their foster youth FAFSA and CADAA completion data. And I don't want to give any spoilers, so I will turn it over.
Okay.
To Andrea. There's Andrea. Hi.
Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you again, J-Bay, for inviting us. Really just to discuss our first attempt at telling an equity story about the FAFSA challenge data that we collect here in LA County. So I'm just going to walk you through some slides that really cover our attempt to tell a story about if some of our students in care are maybe in need of more support than others and able to actually meet the FAFSA challenge. So I'll go through the slides and then feel free to interrupt if you have any questions, or if you'd like to wait to the end, that's fine as well. Next slide, please. All right, so this first slide is really showing you who our challenge eligible students were last year. So in LA County, we had about 1,071 students who qualified for participation in the challenge, meaning they were tracked from October 1st onward. Of that 1,071, we had a completion rate of 53%. So just on the screen here, you'll see the racial ethnic composition of our students in LA County, those who were challenge eligible. And very similar to school enrollment, the majority of our students were Latinx, followed by Black American students, who actually make up about 28.5% of the challenge eligible students, although only 5% here in the county. And then our gender composition, about half of our students identified as female, half male, and there was actually one non-binary student who was included in our challenge eligible students. And then on the very bottom, you'll see the breakdown of where these students were enrolled. About nearly 3/4 were enrolled in the traditional public school, but you also see that public charters made up about 15% of students who were eligible for the challenge last year. And then we, with our partners in both probation and our child welfare system, DCFS in the county, we wanted to provide FAFSA challenge completion rates by agency responsible for the primary care of the student. And so that was also important for us to track as well. Next slide, please. All right, so race, ethnicity. So I was really interested in paying attention not only to the racial categories, but because we are LA County and we have such a large Latinx population, really focusing on ethnicity as well. And so in disaggregating our completion rates at the end of the challenge, we found that Latino students had odds of completion that were nearly 50% higher than that of non-Latino Black students. And in fact, this disparity was statistically significant, meaning it wasn't due to a fluke or anything, but something that would be found true even if we randomly sampled other students in foster care in our county. We found that there was no significant difference, no statistically significant difference in FAFSA or CADAA completion between our Latinx students and our white American students here in the county, however. And on the right, this is just a figure showing, it's fine, just showing our completion rates disaggregated by race and ethnicity. All right, next slide is fine. All right, so I'm a sociologist by training, and so it's always important to me to pull out race from ethnicity. And so what you'll see here is really an examination of Latino identity or Latinx identity disaggregated by race. So in the county, about 56% of students who I self-identified as being Hispanic or Latinx completed the FAFSA or the CADAA. But when we disaggregated this group into like racial identification, the rates really varied. So for those who only selected ethnicity, right, and said like, I'm Latinx, I'm Hispanic only, the completion rate was 57%. Compared to those who identified as Latinx or Hispanic, but also something else. So maybe they were Latinx and they were Filipino, or Latinx and they were Samoan. Among those students, they completed the FAFSA or CADAA at 47%. And then for those who were Afro-Latinos or Black identifying Latinos, they had the lowest rate among Latinos overall, and their completion rate was 40%. And so although this kind of disparity is in place, it wasn't statistically significant, meaning it was likely just due to the 1,000 or so students that we had, we tracked this year, not necessarily something that's true for all of LA County. And then secondly, some of these kind of early findings led me to think, well, maybe it's not a Latinx or Hispanic versus non-Hispanic disparity that we're seeing. Maybe it's a Black versus non-Black disparity that we're seeing. And this is in fact was true. And this is something that is true in many kind of educational outcomes, that the disparity is really disaggregated by Blackness. And so independent of ethnicity, meaning whether Latinx or not, Black students had the lowest completion rates in our county. In fact, Black students had odds of completion that were 38% lower than all other non-Black students. So all other students of color, white students as well, when aggregated, Black students still had significantly lower rates of completing the FAFSA or the CADAA than all others. Next slide, please. All right, and so gender. So what you'll see in the column chart, these are our completion rates by gender. So female students or female identifying students had the highest completion rate of 60% compared to their male counterparts who had a completion rate of 46%. And there's only one non-binary student, and that student completed the FAFSA, thus the completion rate of 100%. But I included this particular student because I do think it speaks to how some of the LEAs are really attempting to report students' identities as the students themselves report. So just the fact that non-binary is now an option for students was to be celebrated. And then secondly, looking kind of continuing on gender, I wanted to look and see if there were disparities in place within probation versus child welfare or vice versa. And what I found was that this gender disparity was statistically significant among child welfare students or students who, the primary agency is child welfare, but there was no significant gender disparity among probation students. And so that might give us some kind of hints as to like what the experience is of students under probation versus those who are under child welfare's care and how it may differ. Alrighty, so intersections of race and gender. So understanding that race and gender, or race, ethnicity, and gender don't live in silos, but that students operate under all of these identities. I wanted to examine how they come to work together in terms of FAFSA CADAA completion. And so one kind of interesting note was that among students identifying either as Hispanic or Latinx, female students' odds of completion were significantly higher than their male counterparts. In fact, Latinas' odds of completing the FAFSA were 56% higher than male Latino students. There was no other significant gender disparity among any other racial ethnic group. So not among Asian American students, Native students, Black students, male and female students, and non-binary students were really completing the FAFSA at the same rate. Among male students, there wasn't evidence of any kind of racial disparity, particularly of the three largest groups in the county: Black, white, and Latinx students. So all that could be understood as Black, white, and Latino male students have similarly low rates of FAFSA CADAA completion, and definitely are three groups that are needing some additional support as we enter into this next year of the challenge. And this last finding was one that I found particularly interesting, particularly when we think about how marginalized identities might position students for worse outcomes than others. In comparing two groups of young women of color, we found that Latinas' odds of completion were 88% higher than their Black female counterparts. So even though they're both operating in the same marginalized gender identity, ethnicity and race in this case were really coming to bear on students' disparate outcomes. Next slide, please. All right, so as a county office of education, obviously we're interested in how our school partners are faring and how kind of outcomes might differ by school type. So I examined FAFSA completion by school type as well. What you see on the screen, the LACO schools are very specific. They're schools that are underneath our county office of education's responsibility, and they're unique, so we'll set them aside for now, but I did include them in analyses for transparency. So in comparing FAFSA CADAA completion by traditional public schools versus public charters, found that there was no significant difference in completion rates. And then in terms of comparing our non-public schools to the traditional, or to all public school peers, so those who are in charters and the traditional public school, we found that non-public school students had odds that were 86% lower than all of their public school peers, excluding the LACO schools, our county office ed schools. And then when we compared our own students, we found that our LACO students had odds of completion that were 78% lower than all other public school students. And one thing of note is that many of our schools are in existence specifically to support the educational needs of justice-involved youth. So some additional challenges there. Next slide, please. Alrighty, and then the last kind of section of a student's life that we wanted to explore were some of the dependency case details. So all of these data elements are found on the CalPADS 5.7 report, so it's readily available data. So that includes the agency of responsibility, the student's dependency service plan type, and then if the parental rights are limited or not. That field that all of you are likely familiar with from the 5.7. All right, next slide, please. All right, so first I'm looking at agency of responsibility. Our students who are primarily under child welfare's responsibility had significantly higher rates of completion. In fact, their odds of completing the FAFSA or the CADAA were twice as high as those students who are under probation's care. Probation had a completion rate of about 38% compared to DCFS or child welfare's completion rate of 55%. And then in just the right side, there's just completion rates by race, ethnicity, by agency of responsibility. And so there were no significant racial disparities or ethnic disparities found among students, whether they were in probation or under child welfare's care. Next slide, please. All right, so service plan type. So the students who were receiving or had received family maintenance services within that year had a completion rate of about 55% compared to those who were in a foster placement who had a completion rate of 53%. And so although it appears as though there's a difference or disparity, the difference was not statistically significant, meaning that was just kind of due to chance. It's not some systematic patterning where students in foster placements have worse odds than others. Next slide, please. Alrighty, and lastly, regarding parental rights, So I was interested if those whose parents still retain their kind of decision-making rights would have better odds than others in terms of FAFSA completion. And I found that this was not in fact true at all. And there was no significant difference between students whose parental rights were limited versus others. And so it's something that we'll continue to track and analyze coming into this next year, but not something that seems to be a primary predictor of FAFSA or CADAA completion. And next slide. All righty, so as I close out, one thing that I do want to encourage or hope to encourage you all to track in your own, and something that we're moving to track for this next year is student placement, something that's somewhat difficult because of the kind of residential mobility among our students, but something that we really like to disaggregate this 21-22 data so we can better understand if this is in fact maybe another disparity that maybe needs to be attended to. So thank you.
Thank you. I think that there was a question in the chat. So the question in the chat is regarding the gender and racial data. So is that data that is reported into CalPADS, or is the data coming from other local information systems?
So the gender data is directly from CalPADS 5.7, and so is the race ethnicity data, which pulling the race ethnicity data into the challenge data set requires a really manual process of filtering the 5.7 by race ethnicity and then doing some kind of extra steps of validating that this is in fact the correct race ethnicity for that student. It's relying on using the filters in the CalPADS 5.7. I've prepared kind of a step-by-step guide for anyone who would like to pull that information into their own challenge data set. And I believe that will be shared at the end of the event.
Yeah, it's actually in the Google Drive. And if you wanted to, I'm happy to pull that up if you want to walk through it. I think folks would be interested. And we have a few minutes, but I don't want to put you on the spot. So you can turn me down if you'd like.
No, I mean, however you like to use the time. I will say that it is a bit lengthy and not all that riveting, but hopefully useful.
Yes, we get this question a lot. So I think it would definitely be useful for folks. Here we go. It's the tip sheet, I believe. Let me see if I can make it a little bit bigger before I share my screen. And we'll go through this for a few minutes before our next section. Okay, can everybody see that? I think I got a thumbs up.
Yes, I mean, so in terms of just the race ethnicity, that would be probably in the middle of the document. We could just, because everything else is just about pulling the data together. Yes, so yes, so the 5.7 report allows you to filter it by race ethnicity. And so there are 10 categories. There are 10 racial or ethnic categories. And so in order to pull the data by race, you have to run the report for each racial ethnic category, rename the file, and then after you have all 10, you have to add a column in your spreadsheet. Essentially add a data field where you kind of manually enter, all Hispanic for that file that you just ran for Hispanic students, and then do it again for Asian American students. Add a column in your spreadsheet and label those students that were generated in that report as Asian American. It's not a time intensive task, but it is a bit of a tedious task. But if it's something of priority to you, it's definitely worth doing. You can scroll up a bit. I mean, so I give detailed instructions, or sorry, scroll down a bit. I give detailed instructions, but essentially it's just running your 5.7 for each specific group, and then making sure that you add a column race ethnicity with the respective group for each student in that report. So it's something that hopefully can be changed in the future by CDE, but that's the only way to kind of access race ethnicity now. So, I mean, I imagine for smaller counties, there might be a stronger relationship with all of their districts, and they may be able to pull that information or validate it directly with their districts. But for us, with the number of students and districts we have, we rely on the 5.7.
Mm-hmm. And I'll just pause there too to see if there's any other questions. see some compliments that you, excellent presentation. We agree. Great. Well, thank you so much for presenting today. And also thank you so much for preparing that tip sheet so other counties can begin tracking the race and ethnicity data too. Like I said, we get asked that question a lot. And if there's folks who are really interested in delving into this year, we would be more than happy to create maybe an ad hoc or some other sort of mechanism to cross-share ideas on how to make this happen. So please reach out. We're very, very interested in this component of the FAFSA challenge as well. So thank you again so much for presenting. I'm going to go ahead and move us along to our panel presentations of our winning counties. So each county is going to share a bit about their strategies, how they've managed to increase their FAFSA and CADAA completion rates over the past year, and hopefully some words of inspiration and wisdom for you all. And we're going to go from large to small. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our partners at Riverside.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Lisa Starr with Riverside County Office of Education. I am here today with one of our very vital partners, Chris. I'm going to turn it over to him to introduce himself. And Sarah, I also want to say thank you so much for having us in the JBay webinar kickoff space today and having us here to do a brief share out. Chris?
Hi, everybody. Yeah, Chris Deck. Work at Riverside Community College District. We operate a grant program supporting foster youth college transition. Nice to be here.
Next slide, please. I wanted to share that for the JBay FAFSA Challenge, Riverside County is designated as a large county. We're the third largest county in the state of California in terms of the number of foster youth that are enrolled in our county. We also do service 23 school districts, and that is split among myself and two other school counselor colleagues within our program, each of us directly supporting 8 school districts. I also wanted to provide a little bit of a snapshot as to how we landed last year for 2021 in terms of our total enrollment for foster youth, as well as narrowing that down to our enrollment of senior foster youth for purposes of the FAFSA Challenge. As you can see, we had a total number of foster youth of 4,415. We had a total number of seniors being 241. And then of those who completed the FAFSA was 161, which gave us a completion rate overall of 66.8. So although we did take a dip in our completion rate from previous year, and in a few slides, I'm going to actually show you our 4-year trajectory of how we have grown in our efforts towards the FAFSA Challenge and in improving completion rate with our senior foster youth. Nonetheless, we did take a dip. However, that did still place us kind of, towards the top of FAFSA completion for 2021 with that 66.8%. At this time, currently enrolled in our county, we have 2,488 total foster youth, K through 12, and we have 198 being senior foster youth. Next slide, please. And so a promising practice that worked well for us last year that we have continued with this year is inviting Sarah Potter with JBay to partner with us on 2 countywide FAFSA Challenge webinars, which we hold in September and early October for our educators across our county. This helps to increase their capacity around the FAFSA Challenge and working with our senior foster youth, as well as providing them, of course, continued professional development. In the first webinar, just to give a quick little brief synopsis of what takes place is we have Sarah who presents on what is the FAFSA Challenge, as well as she does give a statewide perspective of outcomes and also the impact for California for the FAFSA Challenge, for our senior foster youth, and it kind of speaks to also the trajectory of its inception of 2017 to where we are today. And earlier when Sarah did open up our kickoff webinar here, she did share some very similar same information that she provides as a partner in our FAFSA Challenge data barriers and best practices webinar. And so myself and my two counselor colleagues, after Sarah presents, that's where we then come and step in and we provide our countywide FAFSA challenge data and outcomes, as well as we do discuss barriers and best practices. Secondly, the webinar that we provide as a follow-up to that, which happens within a week or two from the first webinar. And again, this is all efforts for us gearing up for our annual countywide FAFSA challenge, is we do provide a how to complete step-by-step application training webinar for FAFSA, CADAA, and the Chafee grant. Sarah provides the FAFSA how-to, and our RCCD partners provide the CADAA and the Chafee grant. This webinar was created from survey feedback that we received from our county as it was a need to help ensure that our counselors were feeling a bit more well-equipped and have the necessary kind of review and step-by-step training that they may have not already previously received. So about half of the survey responses that we received back indicated that we needed to provide a webinar such as this. At this time, I will now turn it over to Chris, who's going to speak about our local partners and partnerships. Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on sort of, in my opinion, this is where a lot of the success comes from. It's the communication and the collaboration between a bunch of different entities in our county, in our area, that have responsibilities to work with foster youth in different ways. And so just to kind of do a brief overview of our program, since 2018, our college district created basically a transition program for foster youth in our 6 feeder school districts. We have 3 community colleges in our district, and we serve 6 feeder districts from those 3 colleges. And so in order to work with these students closer before they come to our colleges, we hired 3 student resource specialists. And each of those staff members are responsible for a certain number of schools and foster youth within their local districts. And so we provide that direct service to foster youth students in 9th through 12th grade, students that are in 9th through 11th grade. A lot of the work is about college readiness and preparation. We work with californiacolleges.edu. They have a curriculum for college readiness within that website, and we work directly with students on that. But when it comes to foster youth seniors, we basically, our goal, our job is to work with them through every step of the post-secondary matriculation process. So of course, that includes college applications, it includes the FAFSA, Chafee grant, and even more important is the steps that come after completing the FAFSA, making sure that they're able to access their financial aid once they transition into college. So we've been working that program since 2018 and have been working very closely with our COE to make sure that we are communicating which students we're working with. They know which students have completed the FAFSA from our end and vice versa. So it's a very excellent, working relationship between our 2 organizations. And then beyond that, we understand that we also keep in touch with all the foster youth liaisons in our local districts, high school counselors, as well as our local independent living program, which is called Thrive in Riverside County. They operate life skills courses. They work with foster youth in different areas throughout the county. And so we're collaborating with them as well to make sure that if they're seeing students that still need to do the FAFSA, that they can help them do that as well. So there's a lot of communication and partnerships going on just kind of within our local area. Next slide, please. And a couple new approaches I'll touch on before turning it back over to Lisa. This year, our COE, our CCD, we partnered closer with the RCOE College and Career Readiness Department. That department sponsors a sort of, an initiative every year called the College Kickoff, Race to Submit. And it's basically, they reach out to local schools and districts and get those schools to sign up and kind of commit to assisting foster youth with completion of college applications and the FAFSA. And, that's for all students. But this year we were intentional about kind of meeting with the person that oversees that program and making sure that foster youth are at the forefront of this initiative as well, so that school districts can, get informed by different entities about which foster youth they have, that are seniors that need to complete FAFSA, that we can continue to reach out and make sure that the schools themselves are aware and are assisting these students. And I know our COE is sort of like, been constantly sort of in communication with those high school foster youth representatives, and are there to offer support as well as the high school counselors and staff on the campuses assist students with that application. And sort of aligned with that new partnership, we're trying to also be intentional about, as much as possible, helping foster youth launch their FAFSA through californiacolleges.edu, also known as CCGI. We have a very, robust sort of collaboration with that, program in our county, and our COE is able to collect data on which students submitted their FAFSA through that system. So just more about the data collection and making sure that we're on track with finding these students. And so I'll pass it over to Lisa so she can also talk about the new FYSCP data system.
Thank you, Chris. So yes, we do have a new kind of FYSCP, SIS data system, if you will, and our data coordinator, Stephen Johnson, is in our webinar space today. So should there be any specific questions around, the data kind of technicality information here I'm about to review, you can, see him in the chat box, direct message him if you would like. And if we get some questions, Stephen will also be able to assist us in answering those, because he is our data guru. So again, Stephen, thank you for being here. So what we do is we pull the 5.7 report from CalPADS on a weekly basis. These 5.7 weekly files are merged together to create a 5.7 cumulative and a 5.7 historical file. These files are then imported into our data system and really are what drive the back end of the work that we are doing. We then also utilize the SSIDs in these files to pull all of the enrollment data out of CalPADS. The 5.7 cumulative file provides us with an unduplicated count of students, and the 5.7 historical helps us identify the length of time that our foster youth that our student, was a foster youth, the length of time that they were in care. With the 5.7 cumulative, we are able to generate a senior file that is added to the CSAC template and uploaded to JBay for processing. When we get the report back, we do import it into our data system, and it's automatically updated and available for myself and my counselor colleagues to see. And then as well, we can then update our FAFSA statuses as we are learning that status and outcome from our high school counselors, our liaisons, as well as from our RCCD student resource specialist that Chris just mentioned about briefly. As well as we are also able to see what is provided by CSAC in our SIS data system as well. Through our data coordinator's bag of tricks, he was also able to sync CalPADS information to each of our students in our data SIS. So as long as we do have our CalPADS open on our computer, then we just click onto the purple CC, which stands for CalPADS, the purple CC button that he made for us. And we click on that and it automatically opens up to CalPADS for the student versus having to navigate back and forth to doing a CalPADS search to then, popping back over to the SIS data system. So it's a quick, immediate access link, and same for FAFSA. We have a FF, I believe it's orange button in our SIS. I could be thinking of our service button though, but Stephen has really been very intentional and very collaborative with us counselors to ensure that the data that we're collecting for purposes of JBay, FAFSA Challenge, for purposes of our grant, that it is very intentional, and he provides us an opportunity to provide him feedback of what is working, what is not working. So we really have also increased our collaborative efforts, within our program to really ensure that, the creation and the design of our FYSCP SIS that Stephen has created, that it really is meeting our program needs and our data needs. So it works, efficiently by clicking on the buttons for CalPads, FAFSA, or we have a service icon as well, where we click on the service button and it immediately opens up to kind of a student individualized form where we're able to input the technical assistance and service component of what we provided for the district for that said student, and so forth. So I wanted to, give you a little bit of a snapshot as to how our new data system, because that is new for us, and we continue to grow and expand in our data, our data components, our data system. So that would be new for us as well this year. And so if you click to the next slide, please, Sarah. Here, as you heard me mention briefly earlier, that I was going to share a snapshot of our 4-year trajectory. Well, here it is. This is due to our county collaboratively working together. You heard Chris mention our partnerships and our efforts collaboratively across the county and with various partners. And so, really those that are doing the direct work with our students have created the outcomes here, from a 51% from 2017 to 2018, growing to 2019, 2020 of a 78.5. As you see our dip there, due to COVID. I know that we all had challenges last year, due to COVID. And so this year, we are hoping for definitely better outcomes. And we have been consecutively the winner of the JBay FAFSA Challenge for the last 5 rounds. But again, this is, we're just here to kind of help drive it. But it really is our county stakeholders that are the ones who are creating the data outcomes for our COE FAFSA Challenge. So with that, I'll pass it over to Chris, who's going to share about our goal for this year. Thank you.
Yeah, so
slide, please.
Yeah. And, just like I saw everyone else in the chat, it seems like it's always 100% for foster youth completing the FAFSA. We want to get as close to that as possible every year, obviously. And, hopefully we can make that happen. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Sarah, back over to you.
Thank you. And you caught me because that was a trick question. There was a correct answer and it's 100%. No, thank you. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our next presenter and also another longtime winner of the challenge, Fresno County. I think Pam's going to kick us off.
I'm going to kick us off. Good afternoon. Thank you for having us. I really appreciate it. And I think really, just like Riverside stated, really is, Lisa stated, it's collaborative effort, sincerely. And I'd like to introduce Amanda Meeker. She's our student services specialist, and Vanessa Marino, who's our education services specialist. And Vanessa will be actually taking off with this, but I just wanted to introduce us. And so we actually also provide our 9th through 12th services, and that really prepares that child starting to think about college and why would they even be filling out a FAFSA. And we do a pre and post, and after that is do you feel that you could even think of going to college? And that has increased over 21%, so that we're on our way. Even though last year was a huge challenge, I felt like we were running after kids and knocking them down practically to get them to fill it out. And even though there was a 55% statewide, I believe, we ended up with 88% completion rate, and we were really pleased with that. Of course, I'm always sitting there, I want 100%, and they look at me like, oh gosh, Pam, okay. So anyway, we always like that. And then we do have 100% direct services to our 9th through 12th, and then our seniors. We've tried it different ways in groups. It just does not work for us. And I know Vanessa will mention this, but absolutely the key for Fresno County is that we have a project lead, and that is Vanessa. Okay, and I'll hand it over to Vanessa.
Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Vanessa, and I am the project lead. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide. All right, so just a quick overview of Fresno County and what our numbers look like. We do have 33 districts and 35 charters in our county. We do serve our 39 high schools. We do also have our 42 adult alternative and continuation schools as well. So breaking down our foster and homeless population, we have 117 foster seniors that are eligible for the FAFSA challenge this year. We have a total of 276 homeless seniors. However, our office, our department really focuses on the 100 who are unaccompanied. And so we will provide those direct services for those 100, those 176 other homeless seniors, because we are limited. They will focus on those seniors as well, but we will work together to complete, hopefully, all of the FAFSAs for this year. Next slide. So just some best practices and strategies. What our department really does is we do have an identified project lead, so that is me. We do run our monthly 5.7 CalPAD reports. Our first report, we normally pull it at the beginning of September. It's not always 100% accurate, so that's why we keep pulling it monthly. Once this report is pulled, we give it to our education services specialist. So there are technically 5 of us now. I know we are expanding our program, but we have 4 education services specialists who we have divided our districts up. And so each person will get their own 5.7 report. They will then compare it with the district's SIS, or their student information system list. And just to ensure accuracy, it's not always 100%, I'm sure, as all of you guys know. And really, our relationships are well established with our districts and our district education liaisons. We do have an established system within our district. So again, we complete all of our foster FAFSAs and CADAAs. Also, we do complete all of the unaccompanied homeless youth FAFSAs, and districts complete their homeless FAFSAs. And our completion rate, it's always going to be 100% for foster and homeless. Next slide. So just what worked well last year, again, just having a point person, an identified project lead, has really helped tremendously. Everybody does their own little project, but at the end of the day, it just all comes to one person, and that way, you know, everything's just down to just the one. Our tracking system, it's nothing amazing. It's really simple. You know, every ESS or education services specialist will email me at the end of the week just to give me their FAFSAs that they completed that week. And it can be, we also check FAFSAs as well. So even if a student says, oh, I completed one last week, we go in, we make sure everything looks good. If there are any errors, we will resubmit that FAFSA. So we really just take our time with each student. Again, running just those monthly 5.7 CalPADS reports are really important. Our students move around so much that just having those reports are really essential. I do send reminder emails to all of our education services specialists. I try to do that maybe every 2 weeks, just to give a reminder, hey, these are your list of students. They haven't completed a financial aid application, and they will respond as to, you know, just what they're scheduled to say, oh, I already have that school scheduled, or that student refused services, or that student is now missing. So just, I take note of every single student and what the case might be of why they haven't completed their financial aid application. I also review the WebGrants reports. I try to do that 2 to every 4 weeks, just to identify any errors in the FAFSA completion. So, and that I do it the traditional way. So just running every report. If they are missing a GPA, if the school has not submitted a GPA, which happens a lot with our foster youth, we track down what school they finished their 11th grade year, and we make sure that their GPA is submitted. That way they can get, hopefully, their Cal Grant money. So something that we're hoping to try new this year is to obtain student lists for all of our homeless youth. Again, our department really focuses on our unaccompanied youth. But I think for this year, we are definitely going to get a list of all of the homeless students that can be doubled up or sheltered, whatever. So just making sure that we see all of those students. Next slide. And so this is just our contact information. If you ever have any questions, if you need to reach out to us, our emails are on there, and as well as our phone number.
We have time for Q&A at the end, so I hope folks stick around and pick your brains a bit. And also, thank you, Vanessa, for mentioning the homeless FAFSA CADAA challenge as well. So this is the inaugural year for that challenge. We're just now kicking it off, and we have a kickoff webinar for that this upcoming Wednesday. So if folks are interested in potentially joining that challenge and following the footsteps of Fresno and some of our other COEs, please reach out in the chat and I'll make sure that you get that information before the end of today's kickoff. All right, I'm going to move us on to our next county. So we have Justin Parker today joining us from Monterey County Office of Ed, and this is their first year. They won round 1 and went round 2 for their size bracket, and so I'm really excited that they can join us and share what's worked well for them as some of our new winners.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. Like Sarah mentioned, I'm Justin Parker with the Monterey County Office of Education. Unfortunately, Gloria Ramos, my colleague, won't be able to make it today. So we're going to obviously sound a little bit different since we're the small county category. So it's going to look a little bit different compared to Riverside and Fresno in terms of what we do. Sarah, if you can hit the next slide for me, please. Thank you very much. So just a little, before we go into this, just a little information on our county. We have 24 districts in our county and 8 charter schools. And we typically average about 250 foster students throughout the school year. In terms of our seniors, last year, we typically average between 15 and 50 seniors, 12th graders, depending on the year. Last year, we had 12 when we started off the challenge, and then I believe we finished with 16 by the end of the school year, and we had a 92% completion rate for our seniors last year. So for those of you from a small or medium-sized county, probably the best practice that I can recommend that you apply is meeting with your seniors monthly. We have a case management component to our FYSCP, and part of that entails running weekly foster focus reports so that we ensure we're capturing all of our students in addition to our monthly CalPADS reports. And then what we'll do is we'll go out to the school sites and we'll meet with those identified 12th graders in person during a non-COVID year, I should say, to make sure that they are on track to graduate and that they have all the services and supports that they need. And also hear from them directly as to how they feel about things, how their classes are going, if they feel like they need some support in different areas, et cetera. We're hearing directly from the youth in terms of what they feel they need. And then we'll also meet with their counselors as well, just to make sure that they are on track to graduate. And then part of that entails helping them with their FAFSA. So we'll go and we'll meet with students in school and bring our laptops, and we'll sit down next to them for an hour and help them complete their FAFSA or the CADAA or their CHAFE application. In a COVID year, obviously, it was a bit more challenging. We weren't, schools were, it's all distance learning, and, we weren't able to go out and do any in-person work. However, because we have that case management component, we had established relationships with a lot of our kids already that were coming into their 12th grade year. That made it easier for them to actually want to meet with us and to actually show up on their scheduled Zoom appointment time and days. For some of the youth that were placed in our county from other counties, we didn't have that prior relationship. We really worked hard to get them in to provide the assistance, but we had to reschedule a lot of Zoom appointments because they wouldn't show up for whatever reason, but they didn't know us. The kids that are from our county that we've been working with for the last couple of years, they know who we were, and so they were more apt to show up for their appointments. So having those relationships with our youth, being a small county, we're able to have those relationships, those direct relationships with our youth. That really benefited us last year in terms of increasing our numbers. Go ahead, Sarah, next slide. And so I'll touch real quick in terms of an equity lens. You know, one of the biggest things to come out of last year is, you know, we all now realize just how important technology truly is to education these days. And so we all know that, you know, we have some really good resource families, foster parents, and we have some that, you know, are, you know, maybe not as able to provide for our youth. You know, so we had some kids that, you know, if their school issue Chromebook or a laptop wasn't working, that foster parent went out and bought a new one that night at Best Buy, right? For some of our other youth, you know, they didn't have the resources to do that. And so if they were having a difficult time with their technology to access the FAFSA application, we would provide the technology for them. We would provide the Chromebook. You know, we had one young man who really wanted us to help him with his FAFSA application, but his weekdays were so packed with, you know, all his appointments. He was trying to get a part-time job. He was in school. He was doing basketball. He, you know, had his therapy. He had his visitation, etc. The only time he was able to meet was on a Saturday morning, like at 7 in the morning. We got up at 7 in the morning on a Saturday and, you know, met with that young man so that he was able to complete his FAFSA. So removing barriers, you know, meeting the kids where they were to provide them what they need is something that we will obviously do. Go ahead, Zara, next slide. I know we got 1 minute here. And so what worked well last year, like I said, we're a smaller county with a smaller caseload, so we have those relationships. We can do the one-on-one assistance, and then the routine following up and checking in, the meeting with them monthly. I can't stress that enough. If you are a small county or medium-sized county and you have the staffing to do this, you know, that absolutely works. And, you know, you can do a whole lot with your youth if you have those relationships with them. What we're hoping to try this year is we have the capability of bringing on an additional staff member this year whose focus is going to be on 12th grade and high school students and transitioning to higher ed settings. And so we now have even more staff to hopefully outreach and connect with all of our youth. And then we're hoping to create come up with some incentives to really hook our kids in this year to get 100% completion rate this year. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Justin. And last but not least, we have our small county partners who won last year, Shasta. So I'm going to turn it over to Cheryl.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Cheryl Harlow. I'm with the Shasta County Office of Education. We are a small but mighty county. We service 24 school districts. Next slide, please. I have to say, just like Justin was saying, that well, and everyone else, collaboration is the key to our success. And so we do STAR meetings, and we meet with all of our 8th through 12th grade foster youth at their school site if possible, and virtually if we can't, or if it's a rural area. We do meet with our seniors twice a year, once in October before we kick off our financial aid night, and then again in April so we can check and make sure they're still on track for graduation and see if there's anything they need. We do review their transcripts. We want to have a fresh copy, and we have the children double check to make sure all of their high schools are on that transcript. And if they're not, we go back and we do some checking. We also check to see how their credit's doing, if they need a reduction. We talk about their goals for their future. What does the student want to do after high school? If we start this in 8th grade, we know we can get those minds moving all the way through their high school years. So they know we're going to ask that question again, and hopefully most of the time they have wonderful answers for us. Do they have any academic needs that need to be addressed at the STAR meeting? We talk about tutoring or modifications if needed. Do they need financial help with the graduation events or other things going on at their school site? At the meetings, we give them flyers and other information about our financial aid night. And then if they're doing senior portraits, we invite our independent living program as well, the mentors, to this meeting so that they can also build that connection with them if they're not part of our ILP program. We also want to speak with their social workers, their high school counselors, and we also send all that information to them as well so that it ensures that the youth receives this information in several different ways. Our community college also attends our financial aid evening to share what services are offered for the youth through their sci-fi program. Incentives, we give out incentives at the workshop. So for attendance, they get grab bags. We have like cool goods in them, headphones, personal care items. We also give them some food at the event, or right now we're giving them gift cards to get some food on the way home. Let's see, we feel like these meetings are an essential component, in our efforts to communicate with our youth and share information to build on our relationships with the youth and our local partners. Next slide, please. Okay, so as you know, collaboration is the key to the success that we have seen, and our 2020-21-22 goal for this year is to continue with our 100% completion. Our equity lens, all of our high schools offer financial aid nights and assistance to the seniors. However, we want to help eliminate any barriers for students. So we do invite them as well. Hey, more hands on deck. We're okay with helping any student. We talk about school mobility as well for foster youth students and homeless students. We try to make sure that we are eliminating as many school changes as possible. And then we also remind the students to advocate for themselves if they feel like they have a need for something. Last year, we held 1 2-day in-person workshop before COVID went on another outbreak. We did have low attendance during that event, but we persevered and we continued to meet virtually to complete the FAFSA applications, and we continued outreach to our high school counselors. And new to this year, we have noticed that sometimes when we're coming to visit our students, they have trepidation coming into the meetings. And so we would like to talk with the high school counselors and our social workers and maybe try to give the children a heads up that we're coming. So that way they would feel more comfortable walking into the room, because sometimes they get this note and they're like, what am I doing? Why am I going to the library? And it just gives them a little bit of anxiety. So we want to eliminate that. So we thought what would be the best way is just to let them know that this meeting is coming up and not to be worried about it. So as you know, collaboration is the key to the success for our county office. And I certainly learned a lot of new information, as this was my first year with Shasta County Office of Education doing foster youth. And I have learned a lot, and I've learned a lot more today. So thank you, everybody.
Great. I realize we're a bit over time, but I think it was well worth it because our panelists today were excellent. Thank you all so much for joining us and sharing your strategies for success that I hope many other counties start to replicate if they're not already trying those strategies. So I'm going to close out today. We have, of course, lots of resources for you. So if you go to our website at this link on the top of the screen, you'll find our promising practices. We have an amazing high school counselor toolkit. We also have a financial aid guide. These are available in English and Spanish, and we also are planning again this year to provide printed copies to our COE partners should you want to disseminate them to your students. We have our FAFSA CADAA trainings, our webinars coming up next week on the 19th and 20th. In the Google Drive, you will see a flyer for the webinars. If you haven't registered already, there's links on that flyer that you can click to register for those webinars. We also have updated FAFSA visual guide, and I'm excited to announce too that this year we're doing a CADAA visual guide. So those are in the very sort of final step of being updated and prepared, and will be on our website. I'm pretty confidently saying by the end of this month. We also have guidance for the IRS verification of non-filing status for students who are non-filers. That applies to many of the high school seniors that you're working with who did not make enough money or any money that would warrant them needing to fill out a 2020 tax return. And then we have our promo material, the posters as well. They're available to download from our website at the link above. And we also will take orders to have printed copies of those made again this year. So expect that order form probably within the next month or so as our materials are finalized and updated. And then we'll send them out to print. All that being said, I hate my headshot. I want a new one. So now I'm just putting pictures of me as a kid on all of my PowerPoints. So this is me and my two brothers during one of our visitations when we were in foster care. So I don't know if everybody knew that, but I grew up in the foster care system here in San Diego. And at this time when this picture was taken, we were separated. But this was one of those amazing opportunities where we got to visit with each other. So this is me. This is my contact information. That's my corgi saying hello. But thank you all for joining us. I'll make sure that all the resources are sent out via email, and the webinar recording is shared as well. I'll stick around if there's any questions, but thank you all so much for joining us, and let's make this the best year ever for the FAFSA challenge. Let's exceed that 70% completion rate that we're aiming for, and let's just shoot for the stars instead. Thank you all so much.